You are listening to the Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the Overwatch League news and information. The show with Tactical Visor on the statistics and analysis. Here are your hosts, Totally Drunk, Spider, and Slambo.
I'm just gonna cut over a little bit early. What is up, guys, and welcome back to Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the latest Overwatch League news, information, and esports analysis. I am your host, Totally Drunk, and tonight on episode 92, we'll be taking a look at the latest news to hit the Overwatch League, share our thoughts on the Marathon Week and Polarizing Week that was staged for Week 3, and of course, we'll preview some of this week's marquee games as we get closer and closer to that play-in tournament. Now, before we can get into the news and introduce you to my co-hosts, let me just take a quick moment to thank everyone who is joining us tonight on Twitch for our live show, and of course, thank all of our repeat listeners out there. So joining me tonight, as always, is my co-host Spider, and Spider, it was a pretty interesting week. We had a day of basically all map 5s. We also had a day where MXL suffered their second 4-0 loss, and then they also only secured one round or map objective in 4 maps. So that was a thing. So, yeah, it's kind of confusing.
I mean, at this point, isn't just being confused like the status quo? Like, we go in every week now in this new 2-2-2 meta, and we're like, man, we don't know what's happening. And I think it's going to come to a point where we're just like, cool, every week we're just going to have to take, match by match, minute by minute, and, kind of try to break it down and level it off, and then, be surprised as things happen and then move on. Because if we keep hyping it up and getting to this point, I don't know if my blood pressure can take it anymore.
Speaking of things that I can't take anymore, and this is not going to be in anything in particular. There's a certain trend, at least with the podcast here. I don't know if you've noticed this. Literally every single week, someone has been put in 2-2-2 in their title, and it makes me facepalm every time I see it because of how I set up Overwatch Recall, and I'm just like, okay, maybe this week's gonna be the week that everyone shies away from it. Nope. Hopefully it's not gonna be an all-stage thing, but outside of that, it was definitely an interesting week, to say the least.
For sure. I mean, there were a lot of really good matches over the week. I mean, like you said, we had some really long days early in the week. And then, as we got into the weekend when, like, the Dallas Fuel played, we had some pretty short games. And then NOIXL took it to the next level and decided, hey, we're going to get out early on work on Sunday and just go out and party. So they, I don't know what happened to them. Like, they basically just, I don't want to say they gave up because it looked like they were trying, but Motto was just throwing himself into the wood chipper repeatedly. I haven't seen a tank feed that hard since we've played with Edinar. So it's going to be a fun week to break down. We have obviously a lot to talk about. I mean, playoff pictures really heating up. We got to see, a team eliminated this week. Sorry, Houston. We got to see a few other teams get very close to being eliminated or pull themselves back from the brink. Like LA Valiant had a really, really good match against the Florida Mayhem, which, 3 months ago, that would never have been a sentence that we would have had to utter because they were both looking at 0-7. So it's going to be fun to talk about tonight. I mean, obviously there's some shenanigans and memery going on outside of just the games. I mean, there was some fun stuff going on with the teams and branding and stuff. But what about you? How are you taking in the craziness that is 2-2-2 and Roll Lock and our number one overlords, Washington Justice?
Well, I will say fantasy this week, at least on Sunday, was just it was a rough go, especially if you had any Charge or NYXL players. There were a lot of players that actually finished with sub 80 points for the day in that series, just due to the fact that it was a struggle offensively. But I'm going to agree with Trenchfoot in regards to Mono and Giannis swapping bodies, so there was a little bit of a Freaky Friday situation there. But across the board, I'm really enjoying the intricacies of some of the swaps that we're seeing. We even got to see a couple more teams trying to incorporate some meta, like the Justice were kind of fiddling around with that, which was pretty cool to see. And we also got to see a little bit of shenanery with a team that did not want to just let their memes be dreams, because they did, in fact, debut a new look, a new brand. That, of course, being the Los Angeles Big Geese. So, here's the deal. Obviously, for one, this was all kind of like unfolded over on social media. So they want to honor their main support, Big Goose, and what better way than basically by naming the team just that? But the thing that I loved about this was the fact that not only did they actually go through with it, but, you even had, like, the casters kind of, like, joining in on it, coming out with their their duck mask, of all things, and our goose mask, which was nice to see. And, they did secure a win against the Dallas Fuel, which might not be saying too much in their current iteration, but, it's still nice to see. And not only did they win, but they won in interesting fashion. They had dropped the first two maps and had to bring it all the way back to secure that reverse sweep, and then they retired the Big Geese name in order to solidify themselves as the only undefeated team in Overwatch League history.
Yeah, so it was kind of like Dallas Fuel have been on life support, and then they started to wake up. They were like, "Hey, oh, is Dallas Fuel doing good?" And like they tested the pulse, and they were looking at it, and then this goose walked up and just put it back down, and that was the end of Dallas Fuel stage 4. So
it was like reverse duck hunt.
It was basically the duck is the hunter, yes. So, but as far as like the memery and the Big Geese, like I think this is kind of fun. If you actually read there's a really good article on it. They kind of break it down like this is kind of them taking off a little bit of the stress of stage 4. I mean, obviously a lot of teams, including the Gladiators, are in the hunt for playoffs, specifically the top 6 to try to avoid that play-in tournament. So it's kind of, very stressful, very high stakes. So this is just kind of a fun way to lighten the load and, kind of let them focus on the game, but kind of keeping it lighthearted. So I did like it. I do think Big Goose is funny. Like his comedic timing in like the announcement video was really good. Like I think they definitely need to have him in more videos. In terms of like the casters and everybody getting involved, I think it was just really good. So I think this is fun. And I think the Gladiators, for being such a trolly team, I mean, we saw it in the offseason really heavily, and then it kind of died down, as the season kind of went on. Seeing them get back to like their trolley roots is actually kind of fun and exciting. So, hashtag beaks up, undefeated Big Geese. I can get behind it, even if it came at the expense of the fuel. It's just something fun, and I don't want to see more teams emulate it. But every once in a while, something like this should happen just to keep things light and fun.
Yeah, see, there's the light and fun aspect, and then there was whatever the Defiant tweeted in regards to releasing their head coach, Bishop. So this was an interesting thing. So Toronto Defiant, they went out and they parted ways with Bishop on Wednesday night. And the team did not name a new interim head coach. So instead they basically have 3 of their other coaches who are basically going to be like taking over the coaching duties. So that would include like Moby Dick was on there, Optidox, as well as Barrow. And looking back, Bishop had first joined the team back in September, and this was before the team had actually signed any players to their roster. And his signing basically came after Bishop had left the London Spitfire. That was like back in last March. And the Spitfire at that point like never actually announced like an official head coach, but they went on to win the championship, so there was also that happened. But the curious thing about this is just the timing of it, and just the way that the tweet was kind of worded. They made it seem really serious. And I know, like, tone is kind of hard to, like, get across just in the tweet, but a lot of people were having, like, the same gut feeling, so, the timing is probably the most peculiar thing, because there's really only a couple weeks left in the season, and obviously for Toronto, really not much on the line, outside of, like, maybe, job security, for some of the players, potentially. But did you Did you see, like, kind of like the aftermath? Of course, you had, like, the Toronto esports owner having to chime in, as he typically does, so... I know our buddies over in the cesspool that is competitive Overwatch Reddit, we're all over that. It's just like, this guy needs to just let it go. He's not
I mean, the wording of the tweet that it was announced that he was let go was pretty, I don't want to say hostile, but it was definitely, like, it was thrown together rather hastily. Like, this wasn't a decision that they came to mutually. Like, this was definitely came across as, we have decided to go a different direction. Thanks, get out. Like, that's basically how it reads and how it comes across. And we don't know the whole story. We know some of Bishop's supposed problems with players, and how he has some a little bit of rough treatment with players is rumored. So we don't know what exactly happened, but we do know, like, looking at the facts, we do know that Toronto has moved away from a primarily Korean roster. Like, they started almost full Korean, and then moved away from that. And Bishop traditionally has coached Korean teams, so maybe the shift to a non-Korean roster caused more friction, and they just realized that maybe Bishop wasn't the coach for this type of roster. He is still one of the best coaches, most, I don't want to say best, but most tenured coaches in Overwatch history. So I could see him being picked up by another team. Like, we were talking about it in chat. Probably not Houston, because Houston's going to be one that would possibly be looking for a coach next season. Don't at me, Houston fans, because they seem really on edge right now after the past weekend. But I don't think Houston. If I had to pick a team, it'd probably be Florida, just because they did move to the full Korean roster. But it's just another season that goes by that Bishop just doesn't finish. So it's par for the course. Next season he'll play like a state, or he'll coach a stage for Florida or something, and then move on. It really isn't surprising, and it depends on your philosophy as an owner. We see this in traditional sports a lot, like teams that are doing badly, or are already knocked out of the playoffs or something like that. Some choose to just let their coach ride out the year. Other ones just say, all right, let's just cut it now and move on. And that obviously based off of Florida's Twitter, I don't want to say Twitter rants, but Twitter messages, it seems like that was just their thinking, is they were just like, all right, it's not working, so let's just cut it now and we'll move forward. So sad to see him go, because he obviously does have some talent for the game, and he wouldn't be where he is now if he didn't. But he'll end up somewhere if he wants to. If not, he'll figure something else out. Like, I'm not worried about him.
Yeah, Bishop just can't follow through for a whole season, just like God has kind of been slacking with the whole wig thing underneath the hat. He's been dropping the ball on that front too.
Maybe.
Oh well. Maybe next week.
Well.
Although maybe, it might just be attached to wins, which are hard to come by for Toronto here as of late. So outside of that, we also have some new 2020 details in regards to Player House, and this came in the form of a leaked memo that was obtained by Dexerto from the Overwatch League. And this memo was sent initially by the Senior Director for Product Strategy and Business Operations at Activision Blizzard Esports, that being John Spector. Now, teams are still required to provide housing for newly acquired talent for the first 90 days of their contract, and after that, teams no longer have an obligation to provide housing. Now, if a team chooses not to provide a player housing, then they have to submit a plan to help a player, kind of like get situated, find a place, and of course, all that needs to be run through the league office for approval. Now, I know, like, a lot of concerns going into, next season is a whole home and away aspect. We're shying away from the typical, like, here's your, like, we're going to be completely based in LA, travel a couple times a year. That's pretty much gone, because we're heading towards that homestand model where, there's going to be, like, 52 different homestand events in 2020. And I think it's interesting, the fact that there's obviously going to be teams out there who are probably going to prioritize having player housing, and then there's probably going to be some teams that are going to look to trim the fat a little bit in regards to, spending money, things like that. So how do you think leverage is going to work in regards to teams that offer housing as opposed to teams that do not provide housing? You think that's going to be a big bargaining chip in regards to, signing new players and bringing them onto the team?
If any team lets it come down to that, then it's on the team's fault. Like, honestly, that should never be a bargaining chip for a team. Like, if one team's going to offer housing and another team's not, you'd have to substantially, up the salary, which will affect other things, which I'll talk about in a second. But, I don't think this is a big deal. I think this is just something that Blizzard put in to kind of alleviate some stress that team owners and team operators were having about costs going into the next season where they're going to have to fly around and stuff. Obviously, I don't expect all teams to have like the Philly or Atlanta style mansions with the private chefs and stuff like that. Like I'll expect more of like what we've seen, like the Fuel operate out of like the, small apartments or like a team house or something, like a standard house, not like a mansion type of thing. But what was more important to me out of this, because I really don't think the housing is going to be a big deal, because, like I said, any team that doesn't offer it is basically shooting themselves in the foot, regardless of what it is. That's going to come into play. But the bigger thing we got out of this is we basically got confirmation that there's like a soft salary cap. Like this is like a single line in this, piece of paper that is something that's been alluded to and kind of confirmed, kind of not confirmed. But basically, what it means is like they call it the competitive balance tax. So if you're familiar with like MLB, it's almost seems like it operates the same way as MLB. But they do say like the housing doesn't go into that. But what that basically means is like every team has an upper limit of what they can spend, and it's the same across the league. Now, we don't know what that upper limit is. It could be, 700,000, 500,000. It could be $1 million. Like we don't know what that is in terms of player salaries. But basically, the way that works is, like say it's like $1 million. The team has $1 million to spend on player salaries. If they sign 11 players for $100,000 each, they're 100,000 over that cap, right? So then they have to pay a tax on that $100,000, which could be 20, 30, 40%. So what that does is that keeps, player salaries down. That keeps, kind of the level playing field. So you don't have the, Moneyball in San Francisco shock with their millions of celebrities to just throw money at players so they can outbid, LA Gladiators on like Decay. They could just drop like a cool 800,000 and say, this is what we want to do for Decay. And no other, like a team like Boston could never match that because they don't want to spend that amount of money. So this keeps it a little bit more fair. My problem with this is this brings into a lot of efficacy issues with like the player unions. And this is like a big wormhole that just got opened. And I don't think people quite realize how big of a problem this is, that everybody knows about this now, and it's slowly gaining traction. Like they were talking about it on the Reddit, like some of the casters are talking about it and stuff like that. I hope this does pave the way for, like Kasha said, transparency, but a players union and stuff like that. But the fact that we know that there's that competitive balance tax, basically salary caps, is like the first step to that. So I thought that was way more important than this whole like housing debate, because like I said, any team that focuses on like not having housing is just shooting themselves in the foot for future talent, because players have actually said it. I forget who I was watching, but one of the players actually said, like, if we see a team that offers say 10% less or 10% more, but another team offers a house instead, like a place to live, they're going to take the place to live, because most of these kids are like 18, 19. They don't want to deal with that. They just want to get paid and play Overwatch and not have to deal with any of that stuff. So, this was a big leak. And I think, as we're in like the thick of it right now. Like we're in playoffs, we're in the hunt for playoffs. We're in stage 4. So this is kind of getting, under the radar a little bit, but I think as we get into the off season, we're going to start to see people focus, circle back around and focusing on this a lot more, because this is going to lead to a much larger debate that we've had since Overwatch League started, which is basically the player union. So this was big news that came in a little package.
Yeah, and it's important to note too, like this was the first time we actually heard Activision Blizzard acknowledging the fact that there is some sort of soft salary cap, at least in a more public setting. But yeah, I definitely expect to hear more and more. And maybe with some of the stuff going on with Houston and a lot of the social media stuff, Shake's always been one of the names getting thrown around the line in regards to someone who could potentially lead a player union should it ever happen, which it absolutely should. It's just a matter of when at that point. But moving on, there's also been a lot of discussion in regards to the general community about the new meta. And there's a lot of people just going around saying, like, yeah, this Dicicle composition is new goats. Everyone has been throwing that around, just because they feel like it has, like, the same fundamental principles with this new team comp. So, with the Dicicle comp, obviously, you're relying a lot on the death ball approach of the game. You're looking to secure, some space and just looking to outlast your opponents. Of course, the May walls help with isolation to secure that pick, all of that good stuff. But I want to get your thoughts on this. So, obviously, like, we've kind of been... Like, we saw goats for a very long time, and this meta is still fairly new. I don't think, like, we've had the majority of the league, like, hard focusing solely run-in May Reaper comps. We've still seen a lot of Hanzo coming into play. We've seen the introduction of Symmetra. We've still seen Pharah, Doomfist, Widowmaker, and all of that. But I want to get your thoughts on how accurate you feel like this new meta is in regards to the stability it has with, like, goats, per se.
Well, I mean, this kind of came to the forefront. Like, teams have jokingly referred to it, like Dogman referred to it as goats on Twitter. But this really came to the forefront when Mineral posted a video and, subsequent thread on competitive Overwatch, which Mineral is the ex-coach of the Florida Mayhem. Super smart dude, really knows the game. But I don't agree with it. Like, there are some points that he made that are absolutely true. Like, this focuses on brawling and sustainability. But he starts to go into, like, Goats was all about the tempo and stuff like that. And that, like, if you go back and originally look at Goats, like, it was never about the tempo. It's definitely more about the sustainability. Like, they got onto the point and basically outlasted their opponents. Because, like, the whole reason we call it Goats is because a team called Goats ran 3-3. Like, but they ran 3-3 with the Moira. Like, they didn't run the Zenyatta. They ran Lucio Moira. And they basically just sped onto the point and stayed there until they wore the other team down. It wasn't until, much later, like when it got to I would honestly say when it got to, like, Korea contenders and then into the Overwatch League, that the tempo started to move faster. Like, that's when we started seeing the Zen Goats, and we started to see, like, the fast paced, like, pick potential, like the stun the diva, use Zarya to pick, type of composition. So I didn't really agree with that. I do, like, I do see the similarities. Like, this is definitely a same type of just press W and try to run into them. But to me, that seems more like Slambulance than Goats. Like, Goats was always about, like, intricate micro plays and doing that. Like, this it more mirrors, like, 4 tanks to me than anything else, because you literally press W and press mouse 1. Like, there was definitely a lot more that went into Goats than this. Like, if anything, I think this is like a regression of Goats. But I do also agree that I don't think this is the meta that we will see in playoffs. Like, I don't think this will be as prevalent. Teams are already starting to move around. Like, they've already started to swap the hog out for diva a little more. We're also seeing a lot more double sniper. We're seeing more Doomfist on control maps. Like, we're starting to see teams really pick and choose where they're moving stuff. Whereas Goats, like, the reason people hated Goats was because it was the answer on every map. Even the maps that it shouldn't have been the answer on, like, say, Watchpoint Gibraltar, which is typically a dive map, you just ran Goats. Like, that was it. Whereas this, we definitely see more map-based compositions. So I don't think that's the case yet, and I definitely don't think like we will see this long term. Like because we also have a new hero coming in, and Sigma can dumpster the May Reaper comp because Sigma is the only tank that I have found that can win a one-on-one with Reaper without having to grossly outplay him. Sure, you can do it on Orisa. You can't really do it on Winston. You might be able to do it on Ryan, but you have to like overly like outplay the Reaper, whereas Sigma can just straight up duel the Reaper and May, and he has a chance to win it. Like it comes down to, you know, more of a closer player skill, whereas the Reaper has a huge advantage. So I think going forward, we're gonna see some more shifts. I think once we get the patch that we're gonna get, you know, hopefully tomorrow, I think is what everybody thinks it's gonna be, into Overwatch League, we're gonna see a much more dynamic meta. But even now, like we're already seeing it. So I don't think you have to worry about it. I mean, you can call it new goats, like, but it's up to your philosophy. I like Dicicle better because I came up with that. But like Meat Locker, you know, whatever you want to call. I don't think it's gonna be as long term as goats. And the nice thing is in 222, it's much easier to balance around that. So if they see like May Reaper is overtuned, which I actually think both of them are, because a lot of their buffs came into combat goats and now you can't run goats. It's easy to bring those back real quick. And then we'll see, you know, double sniper, or we'll see, you know, pirate ship, or whatever we'll see. But it's not going to be as long term as goats. So I wouldn't worry about that. But what about you? Like, do you find yourself like dreading the May Reaper? Because I think it's actually more fun to watch because you get to see like how the Mays interact with their walls. Like you get to see, you know, Reapers, you know, like alpha teleporting into a team. Like there's definitely more room even in May Reaper for individual plays.
Well, like, everyone knows, like, I've always dogged on Reaper playing the Overwatch League, and that was at a time when it always seemed like a troll pick. Now that's not necessarily the case. I'm actually really liking the new meta. I don't like people labeling it new goats when you factor in, you know, looking back, the only swap that we really saw was bringing in Sombra into goats, and that was basically it. But with this one, like, we're seeing a lot of different things, and, you know, yeah, there's a couple of teams that are potentially experimenting with, like, the Symmetra changes. Like, we saw Justice bringing out Symmetra, so she could become a pretty big player in the playoffs, potentially. But, you know, you're still seeing, you're not just seeing the same, you know, 6 characters throughout this stage. Like, we're seeing upwards of, you know, 5, 6, even up to, like, 10 different DPS heroes getting played throughout the week, which is just not something that we ever got to saw in the prior 3 stages. But in regards to, like, the overall play, like, I'm actually really enjoying the setup, and what I really love the most about the May play in particular is 2 things. One, yes, it is the fact that she doesn't have any damage fall off, so I love just seeing the amount of headshots with the right clicks, but I also like seeing the wall usage when it comes to not necessarily like isolating people, but I love seeing the Maze put in an ice wall like underneath like a bongo, for example, like a supercharger, and then lifting it up in the air so the team doesn't get the benefit of it. I love seeing things like that, and it's not something that we necessarily get to see outside of this current meta, because normally we just wouldn't see May or Orisa being played. So we kind of get like unique things that are only happening in its current form that we wouldn't see otherwise.
You also get to see a few Mays like block their team from doing crucial things.
Yep.
which is you know, infuriating when it happens to you, but it's therapeutic when it happens to the Overwatch League, because you're like, oh, these are the best of the best, and they still do that. So as like a longtime May player, that is very therapeutic to be like, good, it's not just me that screws over the team from time to time every match. Every match.
Yeah, good times.
Yeah, I do enjoy the new meta. Like, you know, my personal biases aside, I think it is a good less stagnant meta, because like you said, we are seeing, you know, different heroes in different comps on different maps. You know, obviously the big standout right now is still Orisa, So I think maybe Orisa needs to be addressed, and we'll see. She did get a nerf on the PTR, so you think 1 second off of her shield is not a big deal, but it feels like a big deal when you play her on the PTR, because I actually spent Thursday night playing her on the PTR, and that 1 second longer of a cooldown on the shield, man, you get blown up in that extra second. Like it's crazy. So we'll see if because sometimes that's all it takes. Like think about Widowmaker, 2 seconds on her grapple made her from like never McCatch or son. I don't even know how to say it. Like Slippery Pete. We'll call her Slippery Pete. Like you could just not catch a Widowmaker to now she's not easy to dive, but she's easier to catch. So sometimes 1 or 2 seconds is all it takes to bring a character down to acceptable levels. And if you listen to like your Overwatch, Frito has been like singing praises about the new Reinhardt with the steadfast buff. I'm not quite as high up on Reinhardt as he is, but I definitely think Reinhardt will be easier to play. So I think we might see him come back on the maps that he's good at traditionally. So I think as a whole, speaking as the meta, like come on, we're in week 3. Let's not overthink it too much. Let's just enjoy the May Fortnite walls. Let's enjoy, 2 Mays boxing in 2 Orissas and watching the Orissas just duke it out because they have nowhere else to go. That kind of stuff. Let's just enjoy the craziness as it happens. And then when playoffs come around, we'll see probably a little bit more defined. And then, it will go into the off season and everything will change anyway. So it doesn't really matter. Like come on, we're in week 3.
Yeah, my growing concern right now, especially with the Orisa change on PTR, is let's say Orisa is still meta in the playoffs. That's just 1 second more, then I'm gonna have to worry about Bumper's cooldown usage. It's just like, oh no.
Yeah, we can go on for a while, how we feel each team will do in the upcoming playoffs, and we will.
We'll be wrong about 90% of it.
But yes, we will be wrong about most of them. So, there's no point right now. Like I said, just we're in week 3. Calm it down with the doom and gloom over this is the new GOATs. Like, sure, the pro players are going to complain about it because they're playing May Reaper for 8 to 10 hours a day. I get it. Like, but that's going to happen with any composition. So just calm it down, man.
Exactly. So moving on, we do have an update on the Washington Justice, your first place Washington Justice, who are currently 5-0 this stage. Not that it matters, because there's no stage playoffs, unfortunately, for them, because that would be their only trip to the playoffs, should there be one. But, yeah, that's not going to happen. But Justice have actually made an update to their roster, and they have parted ways with one of their founding players, their main support, Phosix. So the move comes in the middle of Washington's best stage to date, and Phosix was one of the first players that was signed to Washington, and this was back in December. So obviously early on, really, throughout the majority of the season, Washington have been dealing with their fair share of struggles, and they ended up acquiring Arc from the New York Excelsior after that first stage. And, since then, Arc has basically just been the starting main support for the Justice. And I know Phosix had spent a lot of time, I think it was like dating even back all the way to March, when he traveled back home to Pennsylvania, and he's been focusing a lot on his streaming. Now, he has made like a couple of appearances, but it's primarily been like public appearances for like watch parties, things like that. So a lot of that's been being done on the East Coast. For Phosix, but outside of that, he's basically just been doing his own thing, so it's not really a surprising release by any means, but, it does free up a little bit of room for the upcoming season, and, judging by how the Justice have been doing, and just seeing, like, how some of the trends are, I'm really curious to see if they're going to continue, like, the mixed roster front going into the new season, and who exactly is going to be, in and who's going to be out at that point. Because I feel like right now, even given their success, there's really only a couple of spots on that team that I would say are secured for the new season at this point.
I mean, we saw this coming for a while. There was the whole story of Fozix got kicked out of the team house when Sleepy was signed. Like we pretty much have confirmation that that's true. So this isn't super surprising. It is kind of surprising that they held on to him this long, but I guess they finally just decided, maybe enough is enough. Like they finally negotiated out of the contract or whatever. It is sad to see him go because he did have potential to do well. Obviously, the Justice had a lot of other problems that they had to deal with. Fozix never really stood out as like a top tier or somebody that would survive the transition to a better team. But I feel like he is one of those players that we could see mull around in like tier 2 if he wants to stick with it and maybe make his way back in, because he does have really good game sense. Like if you go back and watch like his pre-Washington Justice games, his mechanics were never like super amazing. They were good, but he just would know where places are. Like he was always quoted for being able to track alts really well. So I think we'll see him around a little bit more, but it doesn't surprise me that Washington let him go. I mean, they have a plethora of supports. I mean, we're still having, even right now we're talking about Sleepy versus Guido in chat. So obviously Washington has a lot of options for support right now. So Fozix obviously was on the chopping block because he was part of the basically 0-7 almost every stage type of team. So sad to see him go, but not surprised.
Yeah, I always find it interesting though, when people bring up the discussion, especially now that Washington is winning all the time. Like I feel like it would be a completely different discussion had Washington kind of like continued the trend that they were on. Now that being said, yes, it is said that Guido has been the first to die in a lot of situations. In the current meta, though, it's primarily been teams going after the main supports, and that's been kind of like a common trend here as of late. But it just seems like right now, just with the way that the team is communicating, it's probably just there's more
comfortable with Guido.
They're more
and
comfortable
Arc.
with Guido and Arc together as opposed to Sleepy. So there's more of an even split on the team in regards to the roster.
Yeah, exactly. And I said it in chat and I'll say it here. I would be interested to see how Sleepy does on the team, now that they are doing better. But the whole discussion of Guido dying first, and they actually talked about this on Watchpoint, and they talked about it a little bit during the cast, is that seems to be like Washington's style almost. Like they basically have Guido like go in hard, and they just trade out for him. Like that a lot of the engagements, sure, he dies first, but by that point they're already in position, and Corey or Stratus are already getting picks. So it seems like they've almost acknowledged that. Like it's almost like Guido is a feeder on purpose to get the team into the position where they can do the most damage.
It's a bumper effect.
Exactly. Like it's almost like that type of thing. I don't think Justice have quite perfected it to that level, and I don't know if that is like their intended game plan 100% of the time, because it does seem like he dies a lot first. So we'll see how they play out. Like they had a little bit tougher of a week this week in terms of like what they put on the board. Like there was no 4-0 sweeps or anything for the Justice this week. Corey put on his carry pants, but it wasn't as consistent. So we did get to see, more out of the rest of the team this week. So we'll talk about that in a little bit.
So let's go ahead and talk about the week that was in our post-game discussion. So, we started off the week with what was essentially, it felt like 8-9 hours worth of Overwatch League at this point. Like, I know the games were on till like past like 1:30 in the morning Central on Thursday, and that was because we saw a lot of map 5s. 3 of the 4 matches on Thursday went to that pivotal 5th map. So we saw Vancouver and London go into a map 5, where we saw Vancouver coming out on top of that one. Paris ended up edging out Philadelphia in a map 5, so really no surprise in regards to Philly going the distance, because that's kind of like their MO and always kind of has been. Then, we also saw Guangzhou defeating the Dynasty in a map 5 as well. And, I will say that Vancouver-London series, man, I feel bad for London anytime they get into the situation. Being the least clutch team in the Overwatch League really comes back to bite them in the ass. I felt so good when they won that first control, but I knew, should have gone to a map 5 at that point. It's like, lightning struck once. It's not going to happen twice, and sure enough, Vancouver ended up getting the win there.
Yeah, I mean, this was the opening game of the week, and we knew this would be a super hype game, and it lived up to all the expectations. I'm still not super sold on either team in this 2-2-2 lock, which is kind of weird because both of these teams started out strong, and London was hailed as like one of the best 2-2-2 teams, but they still look really shaky. Like they still try to default to dive a little too often, and we didn't see it as much this week, but we did see it at times. And Birdring still is Birdring. Like he's still very inconsistent on DPS. Like when he's on, he's definitely up there with like the Prophet caliber of DPS, like the game changing picks and stuff like that. But Prophet is definitely much more consistent, and they put a lot more on him, and he doesn't always deliver. Whereas Vancouver do seem a little more like situated. They seem to be, narrowing down their game plan. Like we got to see Stitch a little more this week. Like he came in. We got to see a map without Janu in it, which was actually kind of weird, and didn't go very well. But but as a whole, like both of these teams still have some problems that they need to work out. I will say that I'm worried about London more than the Titans, because the Titans came back out and just absolutely dumpstered Philly, which might be more a testament to Philly's current state than the Titans. But I was happy to see like them return to the mopping the Florida Mayhem form with the Dragon Blades and stuff like that. So London, I'm going to be watching very closely, because this is the time London needs to kind of swing things around and show a little bit more, because we're going to start talking about getting hot going into the playoffs, and obviously the meta is going to change a little bit. But London, I don't know, there's some core issues with London that really worry me. And they're not the only team that has these problems, thankfully. So they can scrim other teams and figure stuff out. London is definitely not a lost cause, but that was just match 1 of day 1. Holy cow.
Yeah, there were a lot of close calls this week. Now, it just wasn't like the map 5, so we also saw the Valiants narrowly defeating Florida, which was another one that had, it was a match that had huge playoff implications for the Valiant, because they're kind of like one of the bubble teams right now. Looking at the standings right now, they are 13, so not quite in the play-in as of yet. But, Florida's been a team who have been looking better as the season has progressed. And sure, they're not in the playoff race or anything like that. But as soon as we've been seeing Gargoyle stepping into the starting lineup, Florida's been looking a lot better and a lot more consistent with their play. So the Valiant opened up the series with a win on Ilios. And then, Anubis happened, where neither team were able to secure any sort of progress on the second point. Which was not the first time that's happened. Anubis was definitely kind of a boon for a lot of teams this week in the series. And, Mayhem, they looked pretty good defensively over on Hollywood. They ended up giving up only 73% progress and ended up tying the series, which brought us to Junkertown, which was another one of these... Junkertown's an interesting map in particular, like, even dating back to last season. Like, you either full held, or you would, like, complete the map 2 times. Well, both of the offenses did, finish the map on their attacks. Did not happen the second time, but, the Valiant ended up getting the better of that. So, right now, the Valiant are kind of in this weird spot. They have one easy match remaining on their schedule, which is this week against Boston Uprising. And then you go into the Kit Kat Rivalry week, And if they're still in the run-in for the play-in tournament at this point, which they should be, it's not going to be an easy task, because not only do they face the Los Angeles Gladiators for a Battle of LA, but then they also face the San Francisco Shock, who have probably been one of the most consistent teams throughout this stage, at least in regards to, you know, the higher ranked teams that have solidified their top 6 in the stand-in. So I don't know how good you can be feeling about the Valiant right now, regardless of any sort of consistencies that they have brought into this stage. But just looking at those final 2 matches, there is a pretty good chance, like, I don't see a situation where they walk away with 2 wins, and they might even be lucky even to grab one of those. So that's a tough way to close out, especially with that much on the line.
It's going to be a hard road for the Valiant. They have turned around, you know, harder matches. You know, maybe not the Shock match, but they definitely could beat the Gladiators, because Gladiators, as good as they are, look really shaky sometimes. Like, it's really weird. Like the first 2 maps of the Fuel, I don't know. I wouldn't even say it was the Fuel playing particularly well. It was just the Gladiators were making all kinds of mistakes. Like, they were positioning weird. Like, they weren't using cooldowns when they should have been. You know, the Big Geese just didn't look like they were in form that day. But then they brought it back around. Like, you know, in true Gladiators fashion, like, they have a lot of talent and they have a lot of skill on that team, so they can do that. And luckily, they have a lot of good, you know, like, team leaders on that team. Like, Surefour is pretty level-headed. Like, they can pull that off. I don't want to say with regularity, but they definitely have the capability to pull more reverse sweeps and stuff like that off, like bring themselves back from the edge. Whereas, like, the Valiant, they are a highly talented team, but you can tell they're still trying to figure out 2-2-2. Like, they're definitely one of those teams that have the tools that they need to. They just need to figure out where the puzzle pieces fit. And, you know, when we saw them play against the Mayhem, Valiant were playing really well. The problem was Saya player and BQB were playing out of their minds. Like, a lot of people are looking at that Junkertown map and saying, well, Saya player was, like, carrying them and then they lost. Like, you know, that showcases, you know, that one player can do everything he can and he can still lose. But really, what kept the Mayhem in this whole, you know, match was BQB. Like, BQB was consistently performing on any hero that he was playing throughout the match, whether it was Mei, whether it was Doomfist. You know, we even saw him on Hanzo at times. So, you know, I don't want to downplay the Mayhem's contribution to this, because the Valiant did look good. Like, they made some mistakes here and there. Like, Custa got caught out of position a few times, or he would have some weird placement on some ults and stuff like that. But as a whole, I think the Valiant have the ability to win these upcoming matches. I definitely don't want to count them out, and they could squeak in because of the teams that are, like, trying to vie in to this play-in. They have one of the better map differentials. So while they don't necessarily have the wins, if they can pull off these wins with a, you know, somewhat decent map differential, they could squeak in. Because there are some teams on this list that are struggling. Like, you're looking at the Fusion, the Dragons are also having some problems. You know, Chengdu is doing really well, but they are definitely on that edge, and they have a bad map differential. Like, honestly, the safest team in the play-ins right now is the Reign, because they have a good map differential, and they don't have a terribly hard schedule. They don't have a great schedule, but so I think the Valiant could make a run on it, but they are going to need some help. So it's like, I have more to say about the Valiant, but it mostly comes into this week, so I'll save it for then.
Yeah, well, you know, the Hunters are a curious case too, because I know they also have a game coming up against the Shock this week, which definitely be very bad for them and that map differential that they have. So there could be ground for the Valiant to make up there in particular. But really, like, one of the most interesting things that happened this week was what we got to see from New York and Guangzhou Charge on Sunday. If you guys blinked, you might have missed this series. It was pretty quick. I know I caught it on VOD, and it took like 20 minutes. Just watching all the matches. And it was a quick series, and yes, it was a 4-0 in favor of Guangzhou Charge. Yes, this was the second time Anime XL put up a goose egg on the board, so, kind of nice seeing that, and then also the Big East in the same week. It's pretty nice. But you would look at 3 of the maps, and New York did not take a single map objective, checkpoint, however you want to call it. But they did get 1 round on Lijiang Tower. And, so much about New York always boils down to people bringing up the old narratives, right? Everyone likes to throw out, the sandbag. Maybe they're just not trying. But at the end of the day, I really feel like the problem with New York has more to deal with the fact that everyone is always going to turn to that, So that's just that extra weight added on to it. Like, sure, they don't have as much to play for, but they're still looking at trying to secure the highest seed possible going into the playoffs. And I feel like that pressure is just eating them alive. And you hate to see it just because it's kind of just become this stain, basically, on their legacy at this point in the Overwatch League, which really sucks, because that is a very talented team, but it seems to me like regardless of what their record is, this has still been one of the best teams that is the worst at adapting whenever changes do arise in the Overwatch League. And really nothing that we've seen from New York this stage has really led me to believe like this is going to be a team that's going to be able to turn things around come playoffs time, when they always kind of find themselves in the same sort of predicament time and time again, and it always has the same outcome at this point.
All right. New York is going to be the fan base I piss off this week, so I'll apologize in advance. But New York is not a top-tier team. They are, in 2-2-2, they are not a top-tier team. I think in Season 2, they might not have been a top-tier team. I think they kind of rode out their division, and they were, maybe upper mid-tier at best. The Atlantic division going into Stage 4 was catastrophically bad. Mm-hmm. Like, we had all the worst teams. And New York has kind of done what Atlanta's done, and Atlanta beat New York twice, but they kind of farmed the division. In New York, for what they have, it is very disappointing because they have a plethora of talent. Like, they have ridiculously talented players. I mean, they have last year's MVP. They have one of the best main tanks in the league. It's sad to see them in this state. And, they did an interview with them, or Danny talked to them in halftime during this game. And they said, we're going to focus on playoffs. We're just testing things out. And that's coach PR speak. Like, that is 100% coach PR speak. Like, they know they are losing bad. But anybody watching these games knows that's not true. Like, they go out and they run the meta. Like, they run the Dicycle, new goats, whatever you want to call it. Like, they run it, and they look bad at it. Like, it's not like
May Reaper or May Hanzo.
Right. They look bad at it, and it's very funny because this is the same conversation we had at the beginning of the year with the Valiant. There just seems to be like a disconnect between the roles where they're not playing off of each other very well. And the fact that they get their forced, they get 4-0'd last week for the first time, and then this week, same night, different team,
and even worse
happens again, even worse. If you would have told me going into that game that New York would have taken 1 point, I would have laughed at you, because even I didn't think that was as bad as they were. But I don't want to be all doom and gloom, because like I said, they do have highly talented players, but they need a reality check for themselves. And I thought these 4-0s would do it to them. Like, it seems like the Titans have taken it to heart. It seems like these teams that are in the playoffs outside of maybe Philly have taken the lessons that they've learned across the season to heart, whereas New York has 2 seasons of being in this spot, and they're not learning. And we look at their record, and they're 21-5, which is really, really good. They have not won a single playoff this season. They haven't even been in a finals this season. Like, at least last year we had like, oh well, they were multiple stage champions. This year they weren't that. So you can see, like, as soon as they run into Pacific teams, or they run into teams that are better than them, they fold. And now under 2-2-2, there's a lot of teams that have adapted faster and are much better than them much quicker. So it's sad to see, because I keep going back to their talent, but they have a lot of talent. So I hope they turn it around, and I don't want to be all doom and gloom on New York going into the playoffs, but I'm with you. And this is the same thing as last year. Like, they have not shown us anything to give me confidence going into the playoffs, whereas the team they played, the Charge, are going for play-ins. They could, they might be. I don't think they can squeak into the top 6 at this point. But no. So the Charge might be able to make it into the top 6, but they need a little bit of help. So assuming that they're going for play-ins, this is a team that looks like they could make a run for it. Like, the casters kind of talked about it, and I kind of agree with them that between the Charge and Atlanta, they could be like this year's Philly, where they're getting hot at the right time. They're grasping the meta. They have the players that play these roles really well. It's just going to be adapting a little bit faster. So as long as they can adapt to whatever this new patch brings, I think the Charge could do really well. Nero has to be in the discussion for one of the best mages in the league, maybe with Stratus. Obviously, we could talk at length about Happy, and whatever sniper you put him on, he's just going to click heads and people are going to die. So, and Rio looks really good. Like, it's crazy to look at this team and say they are a mediocre team for three-fourths of the season, and now they could be one of the best teams in the league. So I don't know. It's super exciting to see, but it goes back to what we opened the show with. Is like, what the is going on right now? Like, who can we count on going into this? And the only answer I have is the only team you can't count on in the playoffs right now is the NYXL. Like, I actually have a little bit more faith in the Spark than I do in NYXL right now, because at least we saw signs of life from the Spark this week.
Yeah, after a couple of weeks of not seeing anything. But really, like, when you look back at Overwatch League history at this point, there's only been like one other time in the regular season when we've seen a team get in full held on Escort, Assault, and Hybrid in the same series. And the last time that happened was last year, when the Shanghai Dragons did just that. They put up a goose egg against the London Spitfire. So it's only happened a couple of times. I think it happened like one other time in the playoffs. I'm trying to remember what match that was. But looking back, this is only the second or third time we've ever seen something like this happen. So, like, if you guys have not had any sort of red flag about New York at this point, that Charge series in particular, regardless of it being a 4-0, I don't even think that 4-0 signifies just how one-sided of an affair that actually was. And, you hate to see it at this point. So hopefully NYXL are going to come into the playoffs with a better grasp of what's going on, but you just don't have the time to really adapt at that point once we get to the tournament. Now, that being said, let's talk about this week's games, because we got a lot on the line this week. Obviously, we're getting closer and closer to that play-in tournament. And since next week is a travel week, it does mean that on Thursday and Friday this week, there are only 3 matches, so expect, those matches to start a little bit later than the normal kickoff for those days. So on Thursday, we have Boston going up against Florida. We have Dallas versus Hangzhou. Then we cap off the night with Seoul Dynasty going up against the Shanghai Dragons. Now, Spider, you and I, like, week to week, kind of talk about, like, how we're looking forward to more of these, more bottom of the barrel ranked teams right now coming into these matches, and just expected more out of them, just because, like, we've seen different signs of life from, like, a team like Florida. Obviously, like, Washington this stage. For Boston, though, it's been a pretty rough go of things. So, Boston matches are still ones that I'm just like, I'm not feeling too confident in how this team is going to do. We did get to see a little bit of changes this past week from Boston, though, when they decided to bench RCK in favor of running Blase on the off-tank position. So, I want to get your thoughts on that approach, and because when you look across the board, really the only other instance we've really seen that in the current 2-2 was when Hydration comes in for the LA Gladiators to kind of play the wrecking ball, things like that.
I don't know if that's a long-term solution to them. Their off-tank situation. I think that this might be more of a one-off type of thing, like maybe RCK was sick or something, or he just couldn't play for whatever reason. I as good as Blase is on DPS, I don't see that as a long-term solution in the off-tank. And if it is, Boston's going to stay at the bottom with the fuel, because he looked better than RCK, but it still didn't look great. It still wasn't any better than some of the other teams are putting out. I didn't see a dramatic shift in Boston. I think maybe they looked a little bit better. Like you said, there's a little sign of life from them, but it wasn't enough to make me suddenly go, "Ooh, Boston, yay!" And this week they'll come out and they'll just dumpster Florida and the Valiant.
I really like the way that Trunchfoot described Boston as the league's farm team. That is very accurate, because this is a team that likes to move talent.
Exactly. So, yeah, Boston is the farm team. So, like I said, it seemed like a temporary solution to maybe a specifically last week problem, or maybe they're really just throwing stuff against the wall and hoping something sticks, because we have seen teams do that in the past with compositions or players or whatever. So like I said, it wasn't enough for me to jump with joy and reaffirm my faith in Boston. And that, like I said, whenever I say stuff like that, Boston comes out and dumpsters whoever they're playing against. So we'll see how they do this week. But yeah.
I mean, that's another way to put it, Kasha. We'll just rename them Boston Market moving forward. Now, Dynasty Dragons is obviously going to be the marquee match of that day. Some pretty big playoff implications there. Because looking at how we are right now, Dynasty are currently sitting in 7th place. Dragons are, a game behind them in 8th place. So you have the Dynasty who have, honestly, when you're looking at the playoff contenders right now, they're probably 5th or 6th overall in regards to map differential at plus 14. Dragons, not so much. Their differential is at -2. So this is a huge game for both. And, the Dynasty are the likeliest team to make that jump up to potentially top 6. Raynor also in the discussion for that as well. I'm trying to think, percentile-wise, who else would be in that discussion. I think Hanjo would probably also be bubble top 6 at the end of the day. So, if you're talking about, the most likeliest team to break that top 6, obviously we have Titans, NYXL, Shocking Gladiators secure in that top 6 slot, but you have Spitfire probably being the likeliest team, and then the Spark after that. So, even the Spark picking up that win put themselves in a much better situation to have to skip, the play-in tournament at this point. But I will say, with the Dynasty, I have been feeling really good about Michel on the off-tank. He's probably been one of the most substantial off-tanks that we've seen in this current meta outside of, Troy Hilbin. And Illicit, in regards to maybe some of, the lesser names in the league on May, has really been a standout for that team. It's just a matter of how consistent is Fitz going to be on that DPS line. But we've also seen the Dragons doing a lot of experimentation with who they're going to be running on DPS, so at least on that front, there are some question marks on both sides, so it's not just a one-sided affair on that front. But, with the Dragons, you don't know which team is going to show up at this point. But I'm hoping the Dynasty will pull out just because they have so much opportunity to move up to secure a higher seed. But I know it's hard to feel confident knowing how much fluctuation we have seen from Seoul this season.
Yeah, I mean, I think Seoul is still doing really well. Like I haven't seen anything in Seoul that worries me outside of maybe Fitz on DPS, but he still comes up pretty big when he needs to most of the time. It's maybe just consistently playing a little better the rest of the time. Um, they need to kind of sort out their support lineup a little bit because they still seem to be questioning Ryu Jae Hong and stuff like that. So I think that's their big question. And as in terms of the dynasty versus Dragons, like this is a big match for both of them because the Dragons, as strong as they looked going into stage 4, are kind of at a risk for falling out if they keep losing because they are one of the teams with the worst map differential. Whereas Dynasty has a lot to play for. Like you said, they're trying to vie for a higher seed. So this is almost like do or die for both teams. Like if the Dragons drop this one, pretty badly, it could end like their playoff chances. Or if the Dynasty, drop it pretty badly, it could do the same thing in terms of like their seeding. Like it can drop them a lot lower. So this is this is one of the trap games of the week. This is like the least trappy game of the week because both teams kind of have a lot riding on this. But there are a lot of other games this week. Like the big match that I wanted to look at was Rain versus Justice. Obviously, these are the two of the hot teams right now. I'd probably say Guangzhou is the third of the hot teams right now. But Rain Justice, like a lose won't knock the Rain out. So they can drop a match here, but a win would mean almost blanket security for them. Like this, a win here would, first of all, not only get a lot of people talking about them a little bit more, but like I said, it would produce a lot of security. And I think it's going to be the most exciting match of the week, just because, come on, we're getting Erster versus Corey. Like it's carry versus carry. We're going to see who can carry the team. And meanwhile, we're going to have Stratus versus Enlear in the background, just duking it out too, which are two DPS that you don't want to sleep on. Pretty much, it's going to come down to if they can kill Janice first. Like, and does that even matter at this point? So I am super hyped for that game, but it is a huge trap game for the Rain because if the Rain lose this one, this I don't want to say it's season ending for them because, like I said, they statistically they can afford a loss. But you want to go into the playoffs being like, we beat the Justice, which was everybody's top of the top. So that's a big one for the Rain for sure.
And you also have an opportunity for a team like Hangzhou to leapfrog over the LA Gladiators. You're at the 4 seed going up against a 5 seed also on Friday night to close out the night. And really Friday across the board has some very intriguing matches. So not only do you have Justice Rain, you have Gladiators versus Spark, then you have Hunters versus the Shock. Now, I feel like when you're looking at these teams, there are probably 3 teams in particular that have, I would say, like, the biggest upset potential in regards to, like, Dark Horse types for the playing tournament. I'd say, like, that's definitely Hunters, Guangzhou, and then Atlanta being that third team. So getting to see a bulk of them this week is going to be huge. And the Hunters are kind of being, like, a sneaky team right now. They kind of, like, weaseled their way into the top 12 at this point. They're 12 and 14 right now, which isn't spectacular. I know their map differential isn't that great either because they do have a -8 map differential going into this current week. But I feel like the Hunters are still a team that a lot of people are still trying to sleep on at this point, and with the way that they've been looking, they're a team that can quickly rack up some wins, especially with the DPS that they have on that lineup. And, when you look at the Shock, the Shock have kind of been the team that we really haven't had a lot of questions about this stage. I know, like, we felt pretty good about a lot of the top teams, and not all of that has really panned out, so Shock have really kind of, like, separated themselves from the pack in regards to like the elite teams. And a lot of that just boils down to the fact that they have been incorporating their DPS players. Architect is really coming to his own as of late, and it's interesting to see like when they're deciding to incorporate some of their other pieces. We got to see a little bit of Sinatra this past week, so I want to see exactly how they're going to work in the DPS lineup that they do have, and seeing how much variations that we're going to be seeing from that team. And with the team like the Hunters, who kind of like throw whatever at you, that's exactly what you're going to need to see from a team like the Shock.
Yeah, this was perfect you bring this one up, because this is the next game on my trap games list, because this is a big one for the Hunters for all the reason you said. I mean, this is the Hunters playoff hopes on the line against arguably the best team right now in 2-2-2. If not one of the best teams for sure. So the Hunters, this is going to be the game that answers all the questions for the Hunters. Like, can they hang with the big boys? Like, so I am super excited to see how the Hunters do in this one. I'm more interested to see what their answers are to the specific style that the Shock run, because the Shock have ran more Genji than most teams outside of maybe the Titans, which the Hunters haven't really ran into yet. So I'm curious to see how they deal with that. As a whole, though, this is going to be a good game, and unfortunately, I'm still leaning Shock, but I do hope the Hunters pull it out, because praise Amang. And his bally, rolly goodness.
And if there's another game that might have people in a ball of emotions, we also have Hunters going up against the Outlaws on Saturday. Now, I will say, this past week there's been a lot of discussion with the Outlaws. Some of it stemmed from the fact that Jake did not play at all. I know there was also the... I think it was one of the halftime segments that they were talking about like potential trades that they could do. So like they listed 3 of the Outlaws players, and then Twitter and Reddit were they jumped all over that. And I know Jay kind of like went on to make a statement on Twitter saying that like he told the coaching staff to give Linkser or Dante, whoever it was, the nod over him to start this week, because a lot of people were just like, well, where's Jake? After the Outlaws had said that Jake would basically be starting every single game at this stage, and that's definitely not been the case. And we have seen some struggles on both sides of the field in regards to the DPS for the Outlaws. So I don't know like how much of that has blown over going into this week, but obviously Outlaws are a very passionate fan base, and there's been a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes too, obviously with the organization going up for sale, things like that, and that's still getting situated, and it's basically like pen to paper at this point. We're just waiting towards the end of the month for all of that to get cleared. But when you talk about playing the spoiler, you have teams like Washington who have been doing that all stage long, and the Outlaws do have that potential as well this week against the Hunters. So if the Shock could go in and they come in and defeat the Hunters at that point, and then the Outlaws play them close, that could basically seal the fate of Chengdu for the season.
It's true, and it kind of goes back to what I said versus the Shock is the Hunters are so close to that edge that any mistake could bring them down, and they have the worst map differential, so that doesn't help their chances. And Outlaws have looked better, like they're slowly getting better. Drama aside, whoever you want to trade or bench or play, whatever you want to do to piss off the Outlaws fans, because I felt really bad for Sideshow, because there's no good answer that you could come out of that. Because I think he was given like Muma, Spree, and like Dante. So putting 2 fan favorites in there was already setting him up to fail. Like I Outlaw fans aside, they are looking better without Jake. Like I hate to say that, because they kind of put Jake as the focal point for the team, but they do look better without Jake. Like they're looking more and more consistent. So I am excited to see what they can do, but they could absolutely spoil the Hunters' playoff chances. And some of these teams when they get out there, like you can tell, like they're taking joy in that. Like when Washington is out there crushing these playoff teams, you can tell like they're enjoying it. And when the Defiant beat Shanghai, you could see like the little smirks in their face. They were like, haha, you're going to the playoffs, maybe, type of thing. So this is gonna be a really fun week. Like I am super hyped for even games that we wouldn't traditionally think would be really good games. I mean, there are all kinds of spoiler games out there, like Paris versus Shanghai. Like Paris has looked pretty good past couple of weeks. Like I would arguably say a lot better than what we expected. Atlanta obviously is doing really well. Gladiators, like honestly, there's going to be some good games, whether or not they matter or not at the end of the thing. And what I really enjoy is teams that do look decent still aren't afraid to throw out a weird composition here or there. Like we're seeing some Genji, we're seeing some maps where teams will run McCree, and they'll swap to the Widowmaker, and then they'll swap to the McCree, and then they'll swap to the Widowmaker, and that's okay. That's just Florida's game plan. But it's gonna be a fun week. Like there are a lot of spoiler games. As a Dallas fan, I was really hyped going into this week because I was like, yes, like the only team outside of Boston that looks as bad as Dallas is the Spark, and then the Spark came out last week and actually looked pretty good, or at least better. So now I'm like, cool, we're gonna go 0-7 this stage. That's awesome. So I guess I will have to pick a different team for the playoffs, which I kind of knew that already. But like going into like this is obviously we're winding down at the end of the season. So like going into stage 4, we kind of knew what to expect, but in week 3, what is your like one biggest surprise? Like I'll tell you mine. My biggest surprise is that Reaper is getting playtime. Like I would have never predicted that. Like we heard about the May and we heard that there was some Reaper usage, but we didn't know that it was like as prevalent as it is. So like what is your 1-2-2-2 surprise?
Ooh, this is an interesting one. How about the fact that I have more faith in the 11th ranked team right now than I do the top seed?
Wow. Yeah,
like I'm very confident in how the Reign have looked throughout this stage. Now, how they'll do against Washington is kind of like a question mark, just because you have two teams coming into this game this week, both running. I mean, you have teams running on empty at this point, and then you have these two teams who are just balls to the wall, just throwing everything that they can at everyone. And I honestly don't know who's going to win between Washington and Atlanta, but Atlanta's definitely had a lot more weaknesses exposed this stage, as opposed to, a team that I do root for a lot in Vancouver Titans. So that's probably the biggest thing for me, and just knowing that, like, we all kind of, like, had an idea of what to expect, only for this meta to just completely flip the script on 99.9% of the league, which is just so surreal. Like, I just love seeing Washington coming in and just crushing people. I love getting to see, like, the US DPS duo just completely dominate Korean DPS players. It's, like, not something you would ever expect to see, and this meta is just brought so many surreal moments, and I'm really anxious to see how that's going to evolve and situate once we get to the playing tournaments, and then beyond that, to the season playoffs.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. So we do have one question from chat. It is from Sale Sable. They said, what else would you guys like to see change in Overwatch after 222 goes live? Obviously, GOATs made a majority of the games played in the season, so teams like New York and Vancouver may not be the ideal teams to play 222, end up in the playoffs, which seems so silly. Do you think Blizzard should hold back on huge changes in the middle of the season for future seasons? We talked about this a little bit in the past, but yes. I don't know how you feel, Totem, but I think we did like a whole episode on this once, and it was yes, like it should either come like midway through the season
Midway.
or at the end of the season. Like that's you know the now we did kind of preface this. I do remember the talk about this a little more as I'm speaking about it. We did know that the teams got to vote when it came in.
Mhm.
Like they got to choose whether it came in at stage 4, and even the teams that were good at goats supposedly voted yes to bring it in before stage 4. So supposedly the teams were on board with it now. It we've gone into like the competitive integrity arguments and stuff like that, but for major changes, which thinking about Overwatch, I don't think there's much else they can do to the game on this scale that would change it so much. Like we're gonna see balance patches, we're gonna see stuff come and go, but like fundamentally changing the game would be I don't see too much outside of adding a new game mode, like a competitive game mode. Like
Right, and I don't expect like hero bans or a map
Right.
ban type system ever happening at this point, especially this early on. Well, I don't want to say this early on because the game's been out for 3 years. But with the amount of heroes and the amount of maps in the game, I still feel like we're like 10 heroes and like another 5 or 6 maps off from them even entertaining that idea.
Yeah, and next year maybe they'll adopt like a loser picks the next map type of format, which is something that a lot of the pros have asked for. But even then, it's still not a fundamental change to Overwatch. Like Totem said, that hero bans, like they've expressed like that's not really something they're looking at right now. So even if they changed their mind, it probably wouldn't be for a while. They already use a selective map pool for the pros, and they've said that going forward in the future, like for ladder, they may do like map pools per season, so they'll cut down the map pool. Kind of like if you ever watched Pro StarCraft, that's kind of how they did it. Is they had a select number of maps they could pick from. But yeah, like I don't see anything that could be as big as 222. Like the only other thing Blizzard has ever done to this level is single hero limit, and even that I don't know if that was as fundamental of a change as 222. At least as far reaching. So it was a good question though. Like don't get me wrong. Like it's just I think in the future we'll see patches come more, but I don't think we'll see as big of a change. Ever again. Like that's my hot take.
Yeah, and like in regards to like major changes, I'd much rather prefer them to just implement it during the All-Star week. Because obviously, like with how lengthy of a season it's going to be, especially when you factor in the fact that we're not going to have stages in 2020.
Right.
Not incorporating anything like balance change wise or anything major like that. That's way too long of a stretch without any sort of shakeups, and I don't like the idea of just having like an entire season just have its one identity. Like you want to see things evolve as the season progresses. That we do give teams in an opportunity to adapt to different looking things, and even like right now, like everyone was kind of like questioning like, well, should 222 happen now or should it come in 2020. Well, just look at all the storylines that have been kind of organically grown since the introduction of 222. Like, it's given us a lot more to talk about. And obviously, with it hitting the game here this week, it's going to bring a lot of players back. And we're going to get back to something that's more current to what we're seeing in the Overwatch League, which is really huge for, both casual players and hardcore players alike. Now in regards to the playoff picture, just a quick update. So there are a handful of teams that are eliminated from the playoffs. So just as a quick rundown, that includes the Outlaws, Eternal, Fuel, Uprising, Defiant, Justice, and the Mayhem. You have some teams that are looking to squeak their way into the top 12. So the two likeliest teams to make the top 12 at this point that are bubble teams are, teams like the LA Valiant and Chain 2 Hunters are there. But, we already talked about the Valiant schedule. Like, they have one easy game out of the 3 remaining. I know Hunters face the Shock. I don't know what their other matches are off the top of my head. But Dragons technically have a chance of dropping a little bit, but they're pretty secure in the top 12. We have 4 of the 6 slots secured for top 6. So you have Titans, Excelsior, Shock, and the Gladiators. And then you also have teams that are trying to secure their top 6 slots. So that's like teams like London, who, right now looking at their percentages are close to like 71% to secure that top 6. You have Hangzhou, and then Atlanta being another contender on that front. So, the Spark have been an interesting case, Spider, as we've kind of talked about. So this stage has been pretty rough for them. I know a lot of the conversation has been like, well, they recalled No Smite and Bozzy. Are we ever going to get to see them play? And I know, like, even going into this week, like, during, like, the halftime segments, like, they're always bringing Bozzy up, even though, things looked a little bit better this week. But given this newfound, I don't want to say newfound life, but given their sign of life this week, do you feel like they're going to secure that top 6 slot for the playoffs?
I think they could. Looking at their schedule, they obviously could beat Dallas, so that's a win. The problem is there's not many people threatening that top 6 spot anymore, based on map differential and just win-loss record. So they'd have to lose out pretty badly, which doesn't look like it's going to be the case. So I think they're gonna squeak in there. They're gonna get the top 6. Now whether they make a run in the playoffs is yet to be seen. Like you said, we saw a little bit of life out of them this week. But I would definitely think that the roster they're playing now is the roster they're going to move forward with. I wouldn't expect No Smite or Bozzy back, despite how many people protest or throw their names out here and there. It seems like, and good on them for doing this. It seems like this is the roster they want to double down on, and I think this is the time that you kind of need to just say, this is the roster that basically got us here, so we need to, go forward with them. Because when you think about it, like there's not that long until the playoffs. So you don't want to be bringing in players like Bozzy, who, while highly talented, could throw a major wrench in the mix and make things worse rather than better in terms of like team play aspect. So I think it's the right choice to kind of just double down on this roster and move forward. That being said, I don't think the Spark have what they need to make a run right now. They were looking really good in 3-3. So it is disappointing to see them kind of fall off, but I do think they'll make top 6.
Yeah, that win last week definitely threw a wrench into my prediction. I'm feeling a lot more confident that they'll finish top 6. Had they lost that, I would definitely say, Reign, we're gonna get that the slot, along with London at this point. But there's still an outside shot for Atlanta Reign to squeak their way in there. And a lot of that could just boil down to how the LA Gladiators do against the Spark this week. So pretty cool to see a lot of matches between, the playing tournament teams, anywhere from like 6 to 12. And then you also have some of the top 6 teams facing each other as well this week. Now, I know we are getting closer to, playoff time, and I really want to get, a couple of the network crew together to do sort of special for, playing tournament previews. So hopefully we'll have more details on that soon, so keep an eye on that. But of course, tomorrow we have the new patch drop in. I know you have something for Sigma to release on our YouTube, so guys, be sure to check that out whenever you guys have a chance to. But with that being said, we are going to close out the show for tonight. So if you guys want to help us out, the best thing to do is to go leave us a review over on iTunes or your podcasting app of choice. Obviously, iTunes is the go-to because it is the primary one. So any sort of feedback or constructive criticism is always welcomed, just because that will offer us insight in how we can make for a better listening experience for you guys. If you'd like to find additional content regarding Overwatch, Overwatch League, Path to Pro, Fantasy Overwatch League, of course we do have our podcast directory, which is Overwatch Recall. You can find that on our website. as well as the weekly recall, which releases every Sunday night, sometimes Mondays, depending on how busy the weekend is. So with the weekly recall, you can find an episodic listing of all of the podcast episodes from the Overwatch community. And for more info on that, check out our website or follow Overwatch Recall on Twitter at OW Recall. And if you guys would like to support our podcast network, as we do have a couple of different Overwatch shows, there's a couple of things you can do. For one, we do stream pretty regularly on Twitch. So any sort of Twitch Prime subs or Twitch subs are greatly appreciated. We do also have a Patreon, where we have tiers starting at just $1 a month. So if you would like to learn more about that, check out patreon.com/OWL Network. So you too can join the likes of our master and above patrons, Blazing Bob, Brendan, Josabal, Alan, and Kesha in helping our network grow. But Spider, of course, we have so many different ways how our listeners can get a hold of us over on social media, Discord, all of that fun stuff. So why don't you go ahead and let them know how they can do that?
Sure. If you'd want to email us, you can do so at contact@owlnshow.com. You can follow us on Twitter at owlnshow. Check out our website. We post articles, all our shows. Totem just revamped it. It's pretty cool looking. It's www.owlnshow.com. Go check out our YouTube, youtube.com/Overwatch League Network. Like Totem said, I have our first Sigma video. Sigma in under 4 minutes will be dropping tomorrow. So if you haven't had a chance to play him, that'll give you a quick rundown, no BS look at Sigma to go in and destroy everybody in the Comp 222 beta test. You can talk to us directly on Discord, discord.me/OWLN show. We're talking through the games and all throughout the week, so just come in and chat with us. If you're listening to the audio version, you can find us on Twitch, twitch.tv/OWLN show. As Totem mentioned, we are an affiliate, so just another way to help support the show. You can watch this show Monday night at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Tuesdays is Fantasy Overwatch with Owl by the Numbers, which is 6 p.m. Pacific Time. Wednesdays is the Variety Overwatch Show with Totem and Edinar at 5 p.m. Pacific Time. And then we do host streams randomly throughout the week, so be sure to hit the follow button so you know when we go live. I will be streaming Thursday doing 222 randomness. Hopefully it goes a little better than it did last week because Totem and Edinar both rage quit on me, so I had to play the rest of the night by myself. Yeah.
Bad groups, man. Feels
bad
bad.
groups. Bad group. I blame whatever role I was playing because I played like hot garbage until you guys left, and then when you left, I started. I don't know. Maybe I was just finally got warmed up at that point because
it was less of a burden.
No, it wasn't even that. Like I knew I was playing like garbage.
I mean, so was I, to be fair.
But it didn't help that like my ping was like so variable match to match. Like one match I'd have like a 40 ping, and then the next match I'd have like a 200 ping. So that really didn't help. So this week, hopefully, since it's going to be on live, it will be much better. I will also play an account that is closer to you guys because I went back and looked at that account, and apparently that was a diamond account. So you guys were playing against some diamond players. So yeah, but hit the follow button. Long story short. And one more time, patreon.com/Owl Network. You can support our show that way too. It's getting late for me, and I still have to edit the Sigma video, so this is going to be fun. So tomorrow's Sigma in under 4 minutes might be pretty crazy, so definitely check that out. You can find me on Twitter at SpiderGD. Totem, where can they find you?
Well, I'm also on Twitter at TotallyDrunkCTR. With that being said, guys, thank you so much again for joining us tonight on another episode of Overwatch League Network. This has been episode number 92. I've been your host, Totally Drunk, joined, as always, by my co-host, Spider, and we hope to see you guys back tomorrow night when we talk about all the Fantasy Overwatch League shenanigans that happened in Stage 4, Week number 3. Take care, and have a good night.